Welcome to the No Huddle Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hey, you see them moves? You see them moves? That running back broke my ankle so bad. He broke my ankle. You know what that means?
Hello and welcome to the No Huddle Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Van Gorden, and I'm extremely excited to announce Episode 1. In Episode 1, we are going to break down our top 20 running backs as well as how we are kind of approaching the running back position in typical 12-team PPR drafts. So when going into drafts, we're kind of looking at our draft position and at the board. And what I see is a very clear-cut top tier of running backs. And then more of a larger pool of running backs that are all kind of the same, kind of high upside, low floor guys you're kind of worried about. So I'm kind of actually looking to target a lot of receivers in the latter parts of the first round as well as the beginning of the second, and kind of come in and get my running backs in the second and third unless I'm drafting in the first 4 or 5 draft positions. Now, I'm also a fan of Ezekiel Elliott. We'll talk more about him later, but I would look to take Zeke Elliott in the latter part of the first round if he's still there. I don't think he's going to miss much of the season, if at all, and he's probably my number 2 or 3 running back going into the season if he comes into the camp tomorrow. So I would look to go Zeke as well. But let's kick off our ranks, and with number 1, we are looking at Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. That should be no surprise to anyone. He was the best running back last year. He led the league in touches with 352. He also led the league in scrimmage yards. So, over 2,000 scrimmage yards in 2018. He was second most in PPR points among running backs on the season. He didn't play with a great offensive line. And I really like him this year because the offensive line has gotten a lot better. Last year, ranked 29th in adjusted line yards. I don't think they're going to get any worse than that, and PFF does have them ranked as the 18th best offensive line with the additions of Kevin Zeitler, one of the best pass-blocking guards in the league, as well as veteran tackle Mike Remmers. Barkley's one of those guys where he's kind of the Giants' number 1 receiver in a sense, and that gives him such a high floor because you also know they run him into the ground. So that's kind of what puts him ahead of guys like McCaffrey and Kamara for me. It's just his running usage is going to be so much higher than theirs, but he's also kind of having the same passing usage as them. So if I was going to go with my number 1 pick, I would take a safe pick here and go with Saquon Barkley. In our number 2 slot, we have Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. And like I said earlier, Zeke may be the pick here at 2 if he comes back to camp. But with him still holding out, Alvin Kamara is definitely my guy with the number 2 pick. Mark Ingram's now in Baltimore, and if you remember last season when Mark Ingram was out serving his 4-game suspension, Kamara was able to amass 3 games as the number 1 running back, so that kind of gives you a sense of what he can do if he's the workhorse. My biggest concern with that is that he's just not built the exact same as Saquon and Zeke, and I've just heard rumblings that Peyton isn't going to give him 25, 30 touches a game. They want him to last. They want him to get the ball in space. And because of that, they brought in Latavius Murray. Now, Latavius Murray is a clear downgrade from Mark Ingram, but he still was a Pro Bowl finisher when he was an Oakland Raider. I mean, he's got some talent, and he will get some touches in that backfield. The nice thing about Kamara and why he's ranked 2 is because he doesn't really need 20-plus touches to be effective. And if he does get 20-plus touches, I mean, his upside is very significant. He's running behind the 7th-ranked offensive line, according to PFF. He's got 2 stud tackles on the outside, and they just brought in a rookie out of Texas A&M, Eric McCoy, who's getting glowing reviews in camp. I think the offensive line should be in better than last year, and I think it bodes well for both Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray. If Saquon Barkley's not there at 2, I will be taking Alvin Kamara. In our number 3 spot, we have Christian McCaffrey of the Carolina Panthers. If you watch Christian McCaffrey, you know he's just one of the most electric players in the NFL. He's shifty. He can rip one off for 90 yards at any given time. You know, it's hard to take him down in the open field. You know, and that's a reason. That's a reason in itself to draft the guy. It's just fun to watch. But last year, he improved his yards per rush from 3.7 to 5. I think that was super significant, especially the fact that he actually increased the amount of rushes that he took. Over the last 9 weeks of the season, he actually scored 10 touchdowns. That kind of buoyed his statistics a little bit, but I do expect them to use him in the red zone as they kind of choose to limit Cam. I mean, Cam's going to take fewer chances as a runner, and you kind of saw that last year. McCaffrey did have 7 red zone touchdowns, so most don't think of him as a red zone goal line kind of back, but they do give it to him when he's down there. The other thing to love about him is he's going to catch the ball every week. His floor's significantly higher than most running backs because of that. In PPR formats, he caught 5 or more passes in 13 games. So, I mean, you're looking at kind of a floor of 10 points a week. And if you can get that out of a guy, I mean, it's not going to win you weeks, but it's definitely not going to lose you weeks. And with that upside I was talking about, he also has the chance to go off for a career day at any point. His offensive line's improved. PFF has them ranked 10th. They signed veteran center Matt Paradis. I think that was very important. They've got 2 rookie tackles. I really like Greg Little, and I think he's going to really shine this year on the offensive line for them. I really like Carolina's offensive unit in general, so I'm very bullish on Christian McCaffrey. I don't really see there being a scenario where he doesn't finish as a top 5 back as long as he's healthy. At number 4, we have David Johnson of the Arizona Cardinals. This is where the running back situation starts to get a bit murky. The top tier is pretty clear cut. I still think David Johnson is one of those guys, but I may insert Ezekiel Elliott above him, even with the holdout, just because, I mean, he's so effective, and it's not really a matter of if, but when he comes back, and I do think that's going to be sooner rather than later. But if you're going to err on the side of caution, I would definitely go David Johnson in the Cliff Kingsbury offense. Last season, David Johnson ranked as the number 9 PPR running back, and I really think that's probably his worst-case scenario as long as he stays healthy. The Cardinals ran the second fewest amount of offensive plays per game in 2018 with 56.4, and that lack of volume really hurts running backs, and it hurt David Johnson in particular. I don't really think we see that this year. Last season, Texas Tech was one of the only 10 teams to target the running back position more than 75 times. So you know he's going to get his usage and he's going to be used correctly. If you want to look at how he was targeted last season, he actually was only targeted 71 times. And if we compare that to some of the other running backs, I mean, Jalen Richard had 81 targets. TJ Yeldon had 78 targets. So I think David Johnson sees a lot more targets than he did last year. If you look at 2016, he was actually targeted 120 times. And I do think that's probably closer to the number that we see this year than what we saw last year. Because of that, I have David Johnson projected to see 1,000 yards in the air as well as 1,000 yards on the ground. And I think he is a pretty safe pick with the amount of plays Cliff will run. And honestly, their defense isn't great, especially with Patrick Peterson being gone for the first 6 weeks. They'll be down a lot and they'll run a lot of plays. And because of David Johnson's passing usage, he will be very effective. So go ahead and lock it in. David Johnson, number 4 pick. My 5th ranked running back going into 2019 is Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I know there's some concerns that he may not show up this season, but I'm really not buying it. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about how if he sits out, he's really just in the exact same situation regarding his contract next year. So it's really not like, will he come back? It's more, when will he come back? So as long as he comes back in the beginning of the season, he's a Sherlock running back 1. In last season, Zeke carried the ball over 300 times. He led the league in rushing last year with 1,434 yards. He also led the league in rushing in 2016 with 1,600 yards. And remember, he was suspended in 2017. I again think he'll lead the NFL in rushing yards this season. It's not very close as long as he plays. The real reason I love Zeke so much this year is because of his receiving production last year. In 2016 and 2017, he totaled just 58 receptions for 632 yards combined. Now, that's not bad, but then he went on in 2018 alone to catch 77 balls for 567 yards and 3 scores. So, you know, he's doubling his production as a receiver last year, and now with Kellen Moore as the new OC, I think he could see even more involvement in the passing game. Zeke's one of those guys who he's a first, second, third, fourth down player. I mean, he's one of those players that you really don't want to take off the field. He's only allowed 1 sack in his 193 snaps as a pass blocker since entering the league. So he's going to be on the field. Another reason to love the guy is he only rushed for 6 touchdowns last year. I mean, that suggests some positive regression. I could see him scoring, double-digit touchdowns. And if that happens, Zeke could take Barkley's spot as the number 1 running back this season. Only Le'Veon Bell and Alvin Kamara have been more productive since 2016. They've all scored over 21 fantasy points, though. I love Elliott. It sucks that he's not in camp. But if he was in camp, he probably would be the safest pick on the board. So I am knocking him down a little bit to 5. But, I'm comfortable taking Zeke ahead of all the receivers. And if you can get Zeke late in the first, I think it's a steal. Ranked 6 is New York Jets running back Le'Veon Bell. If you drafted him last year, you probably won't draft him this year, but I do think he has a nice bounce back here. Bell finally got the long-term deal he was looking for. He inked a 4-year deal worth over $50 million. He's now going to be paired with Adam Gase. Adam Gase ran the ball a lot in Miami. He was above average run rate in the 2 or 3 seasons he was there. And that was even during losing seasons, playing from behind most of the time. I really think Le'Veon could provide a nice safety blanket for quarterback Sam Darnold as he continues to develop. He's looked really good this preseason, and I really think he's a smart quarterback. Bell's one of the most talented three-down backs in the league. He's going to be a true workhorse this year. I mean, he's like Zeke Elliott in that aspect, but he's actually 100% going to be here this year. So I really like Bell. I'm projecting him at around 327 touches. With that, about 1,700 yards and 11 touchdowns in total. If he's able to get more touches, if the Jets are a little bit better than expected, he could continue to outperform his rank. He's a very efficient player, and he's one of the best running backs we've seen in years. So I'm not really shying away from Le'Veon Bell like a lot of other people are. He's not a top 5 guy for me, and I do like Zeke over him in this current situation. But, Le'Veon is for sure a first-round pick for me, and I will be probably targeting a lot of him in the latter part of the first round with people looking to go receiver. Right, number 7 at the running back position is James Conner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Unlike Le'Veon, if you owned him last year, you were definitely a happy camper. He went for 1,400 yards and 12 touchdowns in just 13 games. In weeks 1 through 13, before he suffered his ankle injury, he was tied with Saquon Barkley for first among all running backs in broken tackles with 57, according to PFF. He was also one of only 7 running backs to get 200 carries as well as over 50 targets in 2018. Over the past 5 seasons for the Steelers, every running back who started has had at least 17 touches per game, and that includes guys like Stephen Ridley and D'Angelo Williams. I think James Conner is a lock for the touches, even with Jalen Samuels being there. Jalen Samuels may have standalone value himself, and he's definitely going to be a top 5 handcuff in the league. Maybe the best handcuff in the NFL, but I don't think he will necessarily affect James Conner's value. You saw in the preseason here, he was on the field for 14 out of 14 snaps with the starters. We'll watch in week 3 to see if Jalen Samuels is brought in at all. But you're really happy to see that. He's going to be their Le'Veon Bell going forward. You saw it last year. And the one thing that always makes you happy drafting a Pittsburgh running back is just that offensive line. It remains consistent year to year. Again, this year, Pittsburgh is ranked 3rd in offensive line by PFF. I'm very comfortable with James Conner. I'm probably looking to take James Conner after your first tier of wide receivers. He's the first guy I'm looking to after some of those wide receivers are gone. But he's a safe pick, and I'm very comfortable with him as my running back 1. Ranked number 8, one of the most dominant players in fantasy football over the past 2 seasons is Los Angeles Rams running back Todd Gurley. The worries with Todd Gurley were, despite the repeated assurances from Sean McVay last season, he still sat the last 2 games and then didn't really play much in the NFC Championship game or the Super Bowl. Now we're hearing, everything is kind of all right. We may get a little bit of a pitch count, but, there's really no telling how his arthritic knee is going to hold up in 2019. So it's really all depending on your risk tolerance as if you want to draft Gurley high or not. Someone in your league will, so it's really up to you on where you value him. I personally have a little bit higher of a risk tolerance than others, and I'll be targeting Todd Gurley pretty aggressively in the early second round. If you look at Gurley's statistics over the last 3 years, he's averaged 326 touches per season. That's workhorse numbers. And even if he only gets 75% of the touches he's got over the last 3 years, he's still looking at 1,300 yards and double-digit touchdowns based on his prior performances. I mean, it just has a lot to do with the system McVay runs. I mean, he forces defenses to open up the box with his heavy use of 11 personnel. And that bodes well for Gurley. I mean there is a bit of a concern with the bringing in Darrell Henderson out of Memphis, but I really think he's more of a spell guy than anything. I still think Todd Gurley over a long season is the guy you want. Right now their offensive line is ranked 13th according to Pro Football Focus. They have 2 solid tackles, and their guard, Austin Blythe, took a step forward last season. I like Gurley. I think he has the potential, obviously, to be a top 5 running back at any season, and we don't really know what his usage is going to be. So I like to bet on the over in that situation. Ranked 9th is Dalvin Cook of the Minnesota Vikings. The only concern I really have with Dalvin Cook this season is just his injury risk. He only played 15 of the 32 games in his NFL career. So that's something to worry about. But, everything else is kind of pointing in the favor of Dalvin Cook. After Kevin Stefanski took over for the Vikings ran the ball on nearly 50% of their offensive snaps. That boasted well for Cook. He had 46 rushes for 258 yards, as well as 8 catches for 83 yards in those last 3 games. So he's gonna use Dalvin Cook. He's gonna use his running back, and without Latavius Murray, there's not as much competition in that backfield. They also went out and hired longtime run game guru Gary Kubiak as an assistant head coach and offensive advisor. Since 1995, Kubiak's had his running back one have an average touch of 291. So, I mean, that's 20 years where he's had his running back one touch the ball 291 times. I only have Dalvin Cook projected for 250 touches, so if anything over that should be, bread and butter. On top of that, we talked about Latavius Murray leaving and being a New Orleans Saint now, so that should theoretically open up some red zone as well as goal line opportunity to Dalvin Cook, kind of helping push that touchdown total up a little bit. The only other thing I would worry about with him was the offensive line. I mean, the offensive line can't really get much worse. They were bad last year, but they are only ranked 25th by PFF. They did go out and get a rookie in the first round, Garrett Bradbury, as well as free agent Josh Klein. That should help the interior of their line. With this new scheme, I think that Dalvin Cook has a shot to be a top 5 running back. It's just, how long will he play? Will he play a full 16-game slate? And if he does, will he continue to perform the way he has over the last 2 seasons? My guess is yes. So if you're willing to, ignore the injury history and kind of look towards his full career, I mean, he was very productive at Florida State, then I think Dalvin Cook is a great option in the second round. Coming in at number 10 is Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. He's a volume guy. He drew 73% of the Bengals carries in the 14 games he played last season. The only running back to do that other than him was Saquon Barkley, and he was one of 7 running backs to get 200 carries and 50 targets. So the production's going to be there. The biggest concern right now with him is just the Bengals. Who else is going to step up? I mean, I like Tyler Boyd. When's AJ Green going to come back? A lot of that's up in the air. But if the earlier they come back, the better that bodes for Joe Mixon. Last season, the Bengals were 26th in team rushing attempts and 30th in offensive plays, so they really can't get much slower. And with the new coach, Zach Taylor, coming from Los Angeles, I really expect the pace of play to pick up a bit. And I think with that, Joe Mixon's going to be used a lot like Todd Gurley was over the last 2 seasons. Something else that bodes well for Mixon is the fact that he hasn't seen as many targets in the backfield as Todd Gurley had over the past 2 seasons. So if his target share were to increase in this new system, it's even more of a reason to like him. Coming in at number 11 is Cleveland Browns running back Nick Chubb. Last season, he took over as the team's starter in Week 7, and after that, it was history. He had 4.47 yards after contact per attempt. That was according to PFF, but there hasn't been a running back in the past decade who has also done that. So, when he played, he was efficient as hell. Last year, the Browns ran the ball, though, on 41.7% of their offensive snaps, and that was actually a pretty heavy in comparison to the rest of the league. So I do expect to see a little bit more passing with the addition of OBJ and Baker Mayfield continuing to progress as he gets older. But the one nice thing about the passing game for Nick Chubb is that Duke Johnson's now a Houston Texan, and that kind of opens up the spot. I'd be a bit worried that Hilliard may take a little bit of that role in the first few weeks, but I think Chubb doesn't get as much credit for his pass catching ability, so I think he may get a few more receptions than he typically would have if Duke Johnson was still around. My projection for him is 1,500 yards, double-digit touchdowns. He's clearly a better back in standard leagues. He's not going to get the amount of catches that some of these other guys in the top 10, top 12 are going to get. But he could be a great running back. The big concern is Kareem Hunt, because Kareem Hunt returns in Week 8. And I really have a feeling that John Dorsey likes him. His floor will for sure be lowered. But the ceiling will still kind of be there. We don't really know how they're going to use them. If it's one guy one game, if they kind of split it both, if they both get double-digit touches a game. So we'll see how that works out. It's definitely something to monitor and something to be worrisome of going into your draft. You don't really know what you're going to have in the playoffs if you take Nick Chubb with your first pick. I probably wouldn't even take Nick Chubb with my second pick. Not that he's not the guy in Cleveland for the first 8 weeks. And if Kareem Hunt were to not play, Nick Chubb is a stud. But I just don't know how I feel about splitting touches between two premier running backs, both age 23. The other thing to worry about in Cleveland was in that OBJ trade, they got rid of Kevin Zeitler, who was one of the best offensive linemen in the league. And their line ranks 20th now, according to PFF. So, it's something to watch for. Nick Chubb's going to get his usage. They're going to have to be covering OBJ. They're going to have to be covering Njoku. They're going to be having to cover Jarvis Landry. So Nick Chubb's going to have some lanes, and he's going to be productive in the first couple of weeks. But the one thing to always keep in mind is, how are they going to use Kareem Hunt? And if they come back and name Kareem Hunt the workhorse starter back, what does that do to your team? Number 12 on the list is Melvin Gordon of the Los Angeles Chargers. And he would be higher on this list, but he is, like Ezekiel Elliott, is holding out for a larger contract. My biggest issue with Melvin Gordon and why he's falling so far down in my ranks is I do think that there is a much better chance that we don't see Melvin Gordon through the first couple games of this season. And then once he does come back, I'm not really sure how much the Chargers are going to be inclined to use him, as they kind of have been, preparing to work with Justin Jackson and Austin Eckler moving forward. So that's something to be worried about. Personally, when it comes to Melvin Gordon, he's kind of one of those untouchable guys for me. I'm really not drafting him anywhere. Maybe if he falls to me in the 5th or the 6th round, there's some value there. But realistically, every game he missed, Austin Eckler's value goes up, and I like Austin Eckler, even if Melvin Gordon were to play a full season. So, it kind of puts me in a hard spot. Clearly, Melvin Gordon is a great running back. He deserves the money. They all deserve the money, to be honest. But, the Chargers don't really have the money to be given. And because of that, they're focusing on next year. They need to re-sign Phillip Rivers next year. I just don't see a situation where the Melvin Gordon situation works out. Or, it's going to work out, but I just don't see it working out in your favor as a fantasy owner, drafting him in the top 24, 36 picks. If he were to fall to me, say, in the 5th or 6th round, I may take a flyer in a few leagues, but it's just one of those situations that I just don't think the risk-reward comes out in your favor. It's a headache, and, it has a lot higher of a chance to end up like the Le'Veon Bell situation than Zeke Elliott does, which I still don't think it will, but there is that possibility. If you're looking to target a Chargers running back, I think drafting high on Austin Eckler is not a bad move, but I'm not targeting Gordon, and I would suggest you do the same. At number 13, we have Leonard Fournette of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Last year, a ton of people got burned by him. He was, hampered by a hamstring injury for much of the year. He was still able to manage 439 yards on the ground in just 8 games. So he kind of, for the games played, he kind of was all right. The team obviously has a lot of they obviously really like him. They let TJ Yeldon and Carlos Hyde walk in free agency. There's reason to like him. He was a beast at LSU, and then in his rookie year, he posted over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns in just 13 games. So, there's a lot of signs that point that Fournette, still could be that guy. The system will change. They brought in former Eagles offensive coordinator DeFilippo, pair him with Nick Foles. But, there's been reports of him talking about, Fournette catching the ball multiple times a game. And if that's the case, Fournette's value could go really high. And there really isn't anyone else on the team that could go in and take his touches away in the passing game. He's going to be the third down guy, and that boasts really well for his value going forward. I like Leonard Fournette a lot more than guys, in this tier like Marlon Mack and some of the others. I think if there's anyone that has a chance at a real bounce back year this year, it's Leonard Fournette. That defense, it's stingy. It's going to allow them to establish the run. And with DeFilippo's comments, I'm bullish on Fournette in the passing game. So, feel comfortable taking Leonard Fournette in the late 2nd, early 3rd round. He could be a running back 1 or a running back 2. Probably my favorite player this year went to my alma mater, University of Alabama, comes in at number 14, Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs was underutilized at his time at Alabama. He was extremely efficient when used, but he was always buried on the depth chart. There were always 5-star, number 1 running back recruits coming to the university. And, he was more of a unknown 3-star who came out of high school, didn't get many looks. We actually offered him a scholarship, just based off a look in a basketball game. But as you can see, the kid was extremely productive when he did get the touches. He's a 5'10", 220-pounder. He runs a 4.6 40. He's got that size, speed of a feature back.
What I love about him is he's capable of catching the ball out of backfield, but he can also line up in the slot or even out wide as a true wide receiver. The Raiders actually, target the running back a lot. Jalen Richard actually got 81 targets last season. He was an undrafted free agent, so I expect Josh Jacobs, who's really good at pass protection, to get a lot of looks, in the passing game, as well as be that workhorse for them in the running game. John Gruden loves to run the ball, and I think he's gonna just give it to his guy. You look at some of the usage of these running backs that are taken in the first round since 2014. And the only one to get less than 200 touches was Rashad Penny, who I'm pretty sure sat out because of an injury for some of the beginning of the season. So, you can look at guys like Saquon Barkley, Sony Michel, Todd Gurley, Zeke, Melvin Gordon, McCaffrey, Fournette. Over the last 4 or 5 years, these guys have gotten they use big draft capital to get these guys, and they expect them to come out firing. So I really don't see that being much different from Josh Jacobs. He's got the talent. And I expect big things from the number 14th ranked running back.
Coming in at number 15 is Devonta Freeman of the Atlanta Falcons. Both of his last 2 seasons have been derailed by injury, and he's been a disappointment for fantasy owners. But Coach Dan Quinn has said throughout the offseason that it's been terrific, and he's also said that he's pretty much fully healed from last season's foot and groin injury. I think the biggest thing here is that Steve Sarkisian is gone. Sarkisian does not know how to call plays. And Tevin Coleman followed Kyle Shanahan to San Francisco. Those were 2 of the biggest things in Devonta Freeman's way. Now that Tevin Coleman's gone, the only threat for his playing time will be Ito Smith and Brian Hill, and neither of those guys really offer the same kind of versatility that Tevin offered. So if you kind of go back and look before Sarkisian was there in 2015 and 2016, Freeman was able to rush for 1,000 yards and caught at least 50 passes and scored 13 touchdowns in both of those seasons. I think with Dirk Cutter at the helm, there's a much better chance that he goes back to 2015, 2016 form as long as he stays healthy than in the less efficient Steve Sarkisian offense. Last season, even Dirk Cutter was even able to make Peyton Barber a top 30 running back, and Peyton Barber's he's terrible. What made me like the Peyton Barber usage was just the fact that he used him as a true workhorse. He gave him the ball 234 times out of the 296 times they ran the ball. So he likes to use one running back, and he doesn't really care if they're good or not. So that bodes well for Devonta Freeman, considering he has the talent to be a top 10 back. Right now his current ADP feels like a steal to me. I like Devonta Freeman right at the end of the second round, early third, depending on what you need. He's a really, really solid running back 2, but if you can get him as a running back 1 and pair him with two stud wide receivers, I think that really puts you in a good position, moving forward. Ranking at number 16 is Kerryon Johnson of the Detroit Lions. He is neck and neck in my rankings with Damian Williams, who I have at 17. I like him a little bit more just because there's a little bit less competition in that backfield with the fact that Theo Riddick has moved on to Denver. Kerryon Johnson is a very talented back out of Auburn. He was hurt for 6 games last season, but he still put up some pretty good numbers. The biggest thing that has me worried about Kerryon Johnson, being a breakout this season is just Patricia has been vocal in the past about liking to use more than one running back. And And then we saw in week 2 of the preseason that Kerryon didn't really get, he wasn't really a feature back. He split reps with CJ Anderson, and that is a concern. But they brought in a new offensive coordinator in Darrell Bevell, who ranks inside the league's, top 10 most run-heavy play callers, 7 out of 12 of his seasons as an OC. So there's really a wide range of outcomes for Kerryon Johnson. He's got the talent to be a top back if they want to feature him. But, it's just their offense isn't that great. Their team isn't that great. And I can just see them being in a situation where they have to throw a lot more. Kerryon isn't in the game, and I don't really want to spend this kind of draft capital in a situation where I really don't know exactly, what's gonna happen. I like Kerryon, but I'm kind of looking to grab him more in the late 3rd, early 4th than where his ADP suggests. At number 17 comes Damian Williams of the Kansas City Chiefs. A lot like Kerryon Johnson, there's a wide range of outcomes for Damian Williams, and it's kind of keeping me away. He started off camp sidelined with a hamstring injury, which kind of put him on Andy Reid's naughty list. You saw Carlos Hyde get a few snaps in that first preseason game, but it does look like that he's come back pretty well from the injury. In the second preseason game, he handled most of the first team reps. But what worries me is just it looks like Andy Reid wants to embrace a running back by committee, and in that case, you're really kind of looking at spotty weeks of production. Williams, on top of that hamstring injury, he had a little bit of injury history with the Miami Dolphins. So it just, it puts me a little bit off. He's really nothing special. It's just Andy Reid's system is great. Andy Reid has enabled a top 12 scoring offense in his last 12 of 14 seasons as a head coach. So that bodes well for the Chiefs. I'm a huge Darwin Thompson fan, so I really could see him cutting into carries. And then Carlos Hyde's there, like I said. I mean, he's gonna get a little bit of work. And the only thing that really bodes well for Damian Williams is that since 2004, Andy Reid's only had 2 seasons that he hasn't produced a top 5 running back. So, the history says, if Damian Williams is the starter, Damian Williams is going to finish, as a top 7, top 10 running back for sure. So the risk is there, but if you're feeling risky, then Damian Williams could really help your team. But this is really that tier of running backs where they have a ton of upside, but you really don't know what's going to happen once the season starts. Ranked at number 18 is Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Jones is one of those guys that, if used correctly, could be one of the best running backs in the NFL. He's averaged a league-high 5.5 yards per carry since entering the league in 2017. That's on a minimum of 100 carries. He also has a rushing success rate of 55.6%, which only trails Todd Gurley and Alvin Kamara through the last 2 seasons. The one thing that worries you with Jones is just, he's missed 8 combined games since 2017 with various injuries, along with that 2-game suspension when he violated the league's substance abuse policy. If Aaron Rodgers decides to dump it off instead of extend plays, maybe help his health, that could really bolster up Aaron Jones' numbers. The other thing to watch out for was, I heard rumblings of LaFleur talking about wanting to use a little bit of a running back by committee. I mean, you could see it happening, but Aaron Jones is, such an immense talent. He's one of the best, he's one of the best running backs when it comes to breaking tackles, yards after contact. I think LaFleur will see that, but it does remain to be seen. One of the one comment you do like to see from LaFleur was that he said he intended to marry the run with the pass this offseason. I'm not really sure what that means, but you like to always hear that when talking about Green Bay. They love to throw the ball there. Aaron Jones he definitely has upside, so I definitely like him here at 18. He's one of those guys that you could take ahead of Damian Williams and Kerryon Johnson if you wanted to. He's on a great offense. The offense should play better as Aaron Rodgers looks to bounce back from his injury-ridden season last year. I'm an Aaron Jones fan, and I am comfortable taking him anywhere in the third round. Coming in at number 19 is Marlon Mack of the Indianapolis Colts. Last season, he finished as the running back 21 in PPR scoring, though that was only on 12 games. He was one of only 6 running backs to average at least 75 yards per game in 2018 on the ground. One thing about the Colts that's nice is they have a great offensive line. Last season, they had the 4th most adjusted line yards per carry, and Mac should see a lot of the same based on the fact that they're all 5 project starters are coming back this season. What really worries me about Marlon Mack is Nyheim Hines and what that does to limit his pass-catching upside. Marlon Mack's proven that he can be a pass-catching running back. I just don't know if Frank Reich is kind of the guy that it looks to have a 3-down back. You can see in 2018, Marlon Mack never really was on the field for more than 60% of the snaps. But when he is on the field, he's very productive. And if there was an opportunity that he would get the pass-catching role, I think Marlon Mack he'd be a steal at his current ADP, which is why he kind of presents value in the late 3rd, early 4th round. Rounding out my top 20 is Chris Carson of the Seattle Seahawks. This year he will be used with Rashad Penny as a 1-2 punch, but there have been positive reports out of camp that he will see 2/3 of the touches, and that should be enough in one of the most run-heavy offenses in the league. Chris Carson was able to top 1,000 yards on 247 carries in just 14 games last season, so I don't really see him being any less valuable than he was in 2018, making his ADP pretty appealing. He's one of those guys where he's just really hard to tackle. There were only a few guys last season that were able to break more than 50 tackles, and Carson was one of those. I'm not too worried about the injury history. I'm hoping it's behind him. And, I know Rashad Penny's nipping at his heels, but I just think Carson's the better back. Pete Carroll loves him. And I just think, if you're looking for upside, Chris Carson has a lot of it. I think if you could get him in the late 3rd, early 4th, it's a great place to get him. If you can couple him with another running back or two solid receivers, your team would be really strong. And that is No Huddle's top 20 running back rankings going into the 2019 season. I hope this helps you prepare for your drafts coming up. For more analysis and information, go ahead and find us on Twitter at No Huddle Fantasy. You can also check out our website, www.nohuddlefootball.com. We have fantasy football and gambling analysis. And of course, we will continue with our podcast series next week, where we'll analyze running back 20 through 40. I appreciate you all for listening. Thank you again. Have a good day.